8:35 a.m. A Vietnamese woman climbs the worn staircase of a small building in Osaka. She follows behind a man, a neighbor from the floor above. Hours later, inside the locked apartment, the man is discovered lying in a pool of blood, while the woman has vanished without a trace. A disappearance, a murder, or a crime staged to perfection? Join Crime Documentary Files as we explore today's case. Osaka, a city always bustling and peaceful on early April mornings. But in the quiet residential area of Yodogawa Ward, a horrific tragedy unfolded right inside a small bento box shop called Haka Haka Te Mitsuya. At noon on April 3, 2022, the shop owner began to feel something was wrong. One of his part-time employees, a gentle, hard-working Vietnamese woman who was always punctual, had suddenly disappeared after her short morning break. She didn't text, didn't call, and didn't return to work as usual. The uneasy feeling prompted the owner to immediately review the security camera footage from the shop, but what appeared on the screen left him stunned. Around 8:35 a.m., he saw the young woman leaving the store with a man who lived on the second floor of the same building. The two exchanged a few words, then walked out together. The owner's heart tightened. Sensing something was terribly wrong, he immediately ran up to the second floor and knocked on the apartment door where the man lived. The man living on the second floor was a 59-year-old Japanese man who had been living alone in the small apartment for many years. When the shop owner knocked, he opened the door with a strange expression and a trembling voice. He admitted that he had stopped by the bento shop that morning to buy food, but insisted he had no idea where the Vietnamese employee had gone. However, the way he answered, hesitant, with evasive eyes and unusual pauses, made the owner feel something was very wrong. His instincts flared, but without clear evidence, he had to leave, trying to reassure himself that perhaps the woman had just stepped out for personal reasons. He returned to the shop, continued cleaning the counter and serving customers as usual, but anxiety gnawed at him. Repeated calls to the employee's phone only rang endlessly. No one answered. No messages were returned. By the afternoon of the same day, as the sun began to set behind the rows of houses in Yodogawa Ward, the Vietnamese woman remained missing. At this point, the owner could no longer stay silent. He immediately called the Osaka police to report the mysterious disappearance of an employee working at Haka Haka Te Mitsuya. This marked the beginning of a shocking investigation, and what the police were about to discover in that second-floor apartment would leave all of Japan stunned. Upon receiving the report, the Osaka police immediately launched an investigation. From the initial statements, they quickly realized this was no ordinary missing persons case. The strange thing was, the Vietnamese employee had disappeared immediately after leaving the shop with a man who lived on the second floor, and since then, no one had seen her appear again. The investigation team immediately spread out, gathering information about the entire building, where the ground floor housed the Haka Haka Te shop, while the floors above contained small rental apartments. As dusk fell over Osaka, police quietly approached the 59-year-old man's apartment, the only unit that had remained shut tight since morning. Late on the night of April 3rd, they knocked on the door multiple times. No response, no sound. Inside, only absolute silence. The lights in the room were off, all doors locked from the inside, and this made the investigators' instincts crystal clear. Something terrible was happening. One of the officers whispered to his colleague, "If the woman is still alive, every second right now is priceless." No one hesitated any longer. At 11:35 p.m. that night, after completing emergency procedures, police decided to break down the door. The sound of metal echoed throughout the hallway. The door burst open in the darkness, and what they saw inside that second-floor apartment left the entire investigation team frozen in shock. As the door burst open, a horrifying and puzzling scene appeared before the investigators' eyes. Right in the middle of the small room, the 59-year-old man lay collapsed on the floor, his neck covered in blood, which had streamed into long streaks spreading across the tile floor. The thick metallic smell of iron filled the air. Beside him was a blood-stained kitchen knife, lying among the dark red pool. Medical personnel were called immediately, and incredibly, The man was still barely breathing. He was rushed to the hospital in a deep coma. However, the Vietnamese employee was nowhere to be found. Only the disheveled room remained, silent and eerily cold. And that was when everything went beyond a simple disappearance. In the morning, 2 people left the bento shop together. By evening, one person was seriously injured, the other had vanished. What had really happened inside this second-floor apartment? Had the man attacked the woman and then attempted suicide? Or conversely, was there a third party who had intervened, then staged the crime scene? And if so, where was the Vietnamese employee? A barrage of questions swirled through the minds of the Osaka investigators. Without wasting another second, they immediately mobilized the forensics team and began an emergency examination of the crime scene. The second-floor apartment was just a small studio-style room, cramped and dark. Cold flashlight beams swept through every corner, with belongings scattered everywhere, all appearing as traces of chaos. On the floor, blood had soaked into the carpet where the man had collapsed. The pungent metallic smell rose heavily, mixing with the damp, musty air in the sealed room. The investigators fanned out to search every nook and cranny, lifting every curtain, checking every cabinet drawer. Everyone had the same chilling instinct. The Vietnamese woman might still be right here, hidden somewhere in this room. However, for hours they found nothing. Everything seemed to have reached a dead end. Until the early morning of April 4th, when a house search warrant was issued due to suspicion of kidnapping, the investigation team decided to expand the scope to examine the entire apartment. And then, a horrifying discovery was revealed. Behind the TV stand, a large plastic bag, the type used for vacuum sealing blankets and mattresses, sealed tight with duct tape, lay pressed against the wall. When an officer crouched down and used a knife to cut through the layers of tape, the most horrific discovery was made. Inside that bag was the body of a woman. Her body had been pressed into the hidden corner behind the cabinet, concealed so thoroughly that police during the initial preliminary search had not detected it. Using professional crime scene techniques, police collected fingerprints, blood samples, and DNA, then quickly confirmed the victim's identity. It was the Vietnamese employee they had been searching for. A preliminary autopsy revealed that she had died from asphyxiation. Her neck bore deep bruises, and her tracheal cartilage was fractured, clear signs of extreme force applied from behind. The victim's handbag, which she had carried when leaving the shop, was also found inside. The bag was completely empty. All the money, approximately 26,000 yen, about $180, had disappeared. This led police to conclude that this was likely a calculated robbery and murder. The crime scene was meticulously staged, the body sealed in plastic, the money stolen. The prime suspect, the man himself, lay collapsed with a neck wound. This raised questions among police about the perpetrator's motive. Was he staging himself as a victim, or was he genuinely attempting suicide out of remorse for the crime he had committed? While waiting for the suspect to recover enough to cooperate with the investigation, police reviewed the victim's records to find more clues from her circle of relationships. The employee's name was Vo Thi Le Quyen, 31 years old, a gentle, beautiful Vietnamese woman who was loved by everyone. She was married and had come to Japan with her husband in 2017 after graduating from university with a major in Japanese language in Vietnam. The couple rented a small house in Nishi-Yodogawa Ward, Osaka, just over a mile from the bento shop where she worked. During the day, Quyen worked part-time at Hoka Hoka Te Mitsuya, primarily handling food preparation in the kitchen. In the evenings, she spent time caring for her husband and calling home to Vietnam to speak with family. According to colleagues and regular customers, Quyen was extremely hardworking, polite, and never raised her voice at anyone. A quiet, gentle woman who always smiled when greeting customers, with no enemies whatsoever. So then, why would someone like her become the victim of such a brutal crime? In the community, though she didn't have many Japanese friends, she had a very close group of Vietnamese friends who often visited her house on days off to cook together, chat, and share stories about life far from home. With excellent Japanese language skills, Quyen always harbored a simple dream: to continue her education, obtain a teaching certificate, and return to Vietnam to become a Japanese language teacher for poor children. She believed that Japan was a safe land where hard work would be rewarded, where she could build a stable life with her husband and fulfill her ambitions. But ironically, in the very place she considered her second home, a cruel crime had stolen not only her life, but also her dreams and future. News of Quyen's death shocked the Vietnamese community in Japan, leaving everyone stunned and heartbroken. And for the Osaka police force, her unjust death became a powerful motivation to continue pursuing the truth to the end, so that justice would be served and the soul of that Vietnamese woman could rest in peace. The victim's identity had been confirmed, but one major question still troubled the entire investigation team. Why did she agree to go with that man? What was the relationship between the two that made Le Quyen leave the bento shop that morning? To quickly find answers, Osaka police divided the case into two parallel investigation directions. The first direction focused on analyzing physical evidence at the crime scene, from DNA samples and fingerprints to any remaining biological traces. The second direction involved taking statements from related individuals, especially neighbors around the building, to reconstruct the suspect's behavior before and after the crime. The file on the man in the second-floor apartment was quickly opened. His name was Yamaguchi Toshiya, born in 1962, raised in the Kansai region. According to archived data, he had no serious criminal record and had previously worked as a truck driver for a local transportation company. However, in recent years, Yamaguchi's life had encountered many difficulties. At the time of the incident, he was unemployed, had been in arrears on his rent for several months, and lived alone in the cramped second-floor room. Neighbors described Yamaguchi as an eccentric and unapproachable person. Whenever he went out, he always wore a full military camouflage uniform from head to toe. Some people even said he often muttered to himself, as if talking to someone in the darkroom. Not only that, Yamaguchi had complained multiple times to the bento shop on the ground floor that the sound of the rolling shutter in the morning was too loud, preventing him from resting. Financially, Yamaguchi Toshiya was in severe distress. Financial investigation results showed he had been behind on rent for that small room for several consecutive months, and his wallet, when discovered, contained only a few hundred yen in loose change. From this, police initially formed a clear hypothesis about motive. Yamaguchi may have committed the act to seize the victim's property. A middle-aged man in financial crisis, alone, pushed to a dead end, could easily slide into desperation, and in a moment of lost control, that desperation could turn into violence. Investigation also revealed that before the day of the crime, Yamaguchi had several times lingered and chatted with Quyen when she came to work. However, there was no personal conflict between them, nor any close relationship. According to colleague statements, Le Quyen only regarded him as a regular customer of the bento shop, or simply a tenant on the upper floor. Beyond those chance encounters, Yamaguchi had absolutely no private connection with the victim. This made the robbery hypothesis even more plausible. The body was hidden, money and property disappeared. Everything fit the pattern of a purposeful property seizure. However, to press charges, specific evidence was needed. While waiting for the suspect to recover, the forensics team continued working through the night at the crime scene. Every piece of evidence, from duct tape and the knife to the vacuum seal bag, was seized and carefully examined in detail. The forensic results were sent back early. On the layer of duct tape wrapped around the plastic bag containing the body, police discovered a clear fingerprint. And when compared against the database, it matched Yamaguchi Toshiya perfectly. This showed that he was the one who had direct contact with the body, or in other words, was the one who concealed the victim. The blood-stained knife at the scene was also taken for testing. DNA results showed only Yamaguchi's blood, with no other biological traces whatsoever. The forensic doctor confirmed that the approximately 4-inch-long wound on his neck was self-inflicted, not from an attack. This was a type of half-hearted wound, intentionally suicidal, but stopped mid-action due to survival instinct, resulting in heavy blood loss but not fatal. All of this was consistent with the hypothesis that Yamaguchi had attempted suicide after killing the victim. Furthermore, all other possibilities such as sexual assault or illegal detention were ruled out. The victim's clothing remained intact. Her body showed no unusual injuries except in the neck area. The time of death was determined to be between 8:45 and 9 a.m. on April 3rd. The next crucial clue that helped break through the mystery was the security camera system inside and around the building where the crime occurred. When extracting the data, police saw the last image of Vothila Quyen alive. At 8:35 a.m. on April 3rd, she walked up the stairs following behind Yamaguchi Toshiya. The door to the second-floor apartment closed, and from that moment, no one saw her appear again. That same day, another camera at a nearby convenience store captured Yamaguchi appearing around midday. He calmly purchased a bottle of sake and a pack of cigarettes, then casually returned to the apartment, as if nothing had happened just hours earlier. These images made police understand that Yamaguchi remained completely lucid after committing the crime. He didn't flee, didn't panic, but acted with frightening composure. To further clarify what had happened that morning, the owner of Bento Mitsuya shop was invited for questioning. He stated that around 8 a.m. on April 3rd, Yamaguchi had come to the shop earlier than usual, when the store hadn't yet opened. He whispered something to Quyen, then both left together. The owner didn't hear clearly, but vaguely heard Yamaguchi say something about, "The boss asked me to," which is why Quyen followed him upstairs without suspicion. Investigation also revealed that Quyen's last phone call on the evening of April 2nd was with her husband, the content completely normal, with no connection whatsoever to Yamaguchi. Quyen's friends and husband were also invited to give statements. All confirmed. She had never mentioned the man from the upper floor, let alone any dating or personal conflicts. Once again, all clues pointed in the same direction. The sole motive was robbery. The breakthrough in the case occurred on April 6, 2022, when the suspect regained consciousness after several days of treatment. With the evidence already collected, police had sufficient grounds to arrest Yamaguchi as he was the prime suspect. Facing police this time, Yamaguchi Toshiya didn't resist, but quickly confessed everything. He said he was living in desperate poverty, unemployed, buried in debt, with only a few hundred yen of loose change in his wallet. In that desperation, he came up with a reckless idea: to rob money from the Vietnamese employee working at the rice shop right below his apartment. On the morning of April 3rd, Yamaguchi fabricated a story about the boss needing something, then lured her to his room. After closing the door, he stood behind her, then suddenly applied a chokehold. That chokehold, he said, was learned from a judo program on television. He only intended to knock her unconscious, but the force was too strong, and within seconds the small woman stopped breathing. Afterward, he searched through her wallet and took approximately 26,000 yen, about $180. And at that moment, Yamaguchi said, he knew he could never turn back. In panic, he hid the body, then attempted suicide, hoping to end it all. Yamaguchi Toshiya's statement was later cross-checked by police with digital data for verification. His phone was taken for analysis, and the results sent chills through the investigators. In his internet search history, Yamaguchi had looked up "how to end one's life" and "life insurance for the poor" just days before committing the crime. Those search terms revealed deep psychological disorder and desperation. To better understand the true motive behind the brutal act, Osaka police consulted criminal psychology experts. The perpetrator's profile gradually became clearer. A middle-aged man in financial crisis, alone, pushed to the brink, and in a moment of lost control, desperation turned into violence. Experts assessed that after committing the act, Yamaguchi fell into a state of panic, emotionally numb, which is why he remained calm enough to go to the convenience store and buy sake and cigarettes. That seemingly callous behavior was actually a self-soothing mechanism, attempting both to hide his guilt and to forget the fear of punishment through alcohol and tobacco smoke. On April 6, 2022, with sufficient evidence, confession, and analysis results, Osaka police officially arrested and detained Yamaguchi Toshiya. He was transferred to the detention center with his neck wound now stabilized to await formal criminal prosecution. From the pieces collected over many days, Osaka police finally assembled the complete picture of the case. In the early days of 2022, Yamaguchi Toshiya lived precariously in his second-floor rental room, each day passing with worries about basic needs. During trips downstairs to the bento shop to buy boxed meals, Yamaguchi noticed that the Vietnamese employee named Le Quyen often arrived at the shop early to prepare before opening. On the night of April 2nd, 2022, desperate after receiving a debt notice, Yamaguchi conceived the idea of robbing money from that Vietnamese woman. He thought since she was a foreigner, she might not dare resist strongly. A savage plan began to form. And at 8:30 a.m. on April 3rd, 2022, Yamaguchi woke earlier than usual, put on his familiar camouflage outfit, hid a roll of duct tape and a small knife in his pocket, and went downstairs. He saw Quyen arranging items inside the bento shop. Taking a breath to regain composure, Yamaguchi entered the shop. Quyen looked up to greet the customer and recognized the familiar person from upstairs. Yamaguchi pretended to be in a hurry, saying the boss had asked for something upstairs. Le Quyen was slightly confused, but upon hearing about the boss, immediately trusted him. She removed her apron, grabbed her wallet and phone, and followed the man up the stairs. Upon reaching Yamaguchi's room, Quyen saw nothing special except a messy and dark place. This was around 8:40 a.m. Yamaguchi quietly locked the door, then showed his true face. Before Quyen could react, he had approached her with fierce eyes and demanded she lend him money, or hand over all her money immediately. Quyen was startled, realizing she had been tricked. She refused and firmly said she would call the police. This resistance was outside Yamaguchi's expectations. In a panic, he rushed forward to cover Quyen's mouth. The terrified woman screamed loudly for help. Seeing the victim resisting strongly, Yamaguchi quickly moved behind her and wrapped his powerful arms around Le Quyen's neck in a tight grip. She struggled and clawed, but to no avail. Yamaguchi squeezed tighter and tighter. Within a few dozen short seconds, the employee stopped breathing and went motionless on the floor. Only then did Yamaguchi gradually calm down, horrified to realize the terrible thing he had just done. Though very frightened, he still managed to search for Quyen's wallet, took all the money, 26,000 yen, and stuffed it in his pocket. As for the victim's phone, Yamaguchi turned it off and threw it into a gap behind the cabinet to hide it. Facing Le Quyen's body, he thought for a moment, then opened a closet and pulled out a vacuum-seal plastic bag normally used for storing blankets. Yamaguchi opened the bag, curled the victim up, and stuffed her inside. He sealed the bag's opening with thick duct tape to ensure no one would discover it. He also pulled the TV stand forward and pushed the bag behind it, completely out of sight. By 9:30 a.m., the room had returned to an eerily calm state, with no trace of the ill-fated woman, except for some scratches on Yamaguchi's hands and the slightly disturbed room. By midday that same day, Yamaguchi checked the money he had taken, then went to buy alcohol to try to calm himself. He walked into a nearby convenience store, used the stolen money to buy a small bottle of sake and a pack of cigarettes. While drinking, Yamaguchi gradually formed a plan to escape reality in an extreme way: suicide. He locked the door tight, hastily wrote a few lines on paper, but still didn't dare harm himself. Only in the afternoon of the same day, when police knocked on the door requesting cooperation with the investigation, did Yamaguchi feel compelled to do that terrible thing. The knocking rang out many times. Yamaguchi held his breath, determined not to open. After holding out until evening, knowing the police would eventually break in, Yamaguchi grabbed a kitchen knife and, closing his eyes, made a decisive cut. Though the wound didn't hit an artery, it was enough to cause him to lose a lot of blood. Unfortunately, this plan didn't succeed. At 11:35 p.m. on the night of April 3rd, police broke down the door and rushed in to save Yamaguchi. The case of Yamaguchi Toshiya was quickly brought to trial at Osaka District Court. The prosecution process took place over 9 months after the crime, attracting attention from both Japanese public opinion and the Vietnamese community. The first trial opened in early 2023, with a jury trial format due to the serious nature of the charges. However, a surprise occurred right in court when Yamaguchi changed his testimony and denied the charges. Contrary to his initial confession, He testified in court that he had no intention to harm or rob when he invited Queen to his room. Yamaguchi said he only wanted to borrow money, and because the victim kept screaming, he panicked and accidentally caused her to suffocate. Yamaguchi and his lawyer requested the court reduce the charge to causing injury resulting in death and theft instead of robbery with murder. They argued that Yamaguchi only deserved about 15 years in prison for this lesser charge. However, the prosecution was well prepared for this possibility of denial. They presented a series of evidence and ironclad arguments, recreating the crime scene to prove the defendant had clear motive and intent. They emphasized that using full force continuously until the victim stopped breathing showed clear malice and could not be defended as accidental. Furthermore, after committing the crime, the defendant took money. This act constituted sufficient elements for the crime of robbery. They requested the highest sentence below capital punishment, life imprisonment, to permanently remove this dangerous individual from society. The trial arguments were intense. The defense lawyer tried to salvage the defendant's image by saying he had difficult circumstances, committed the crime while mentally distressed, and attempted suicide to show remorse. But those arguments could hardly sway the jury before the horrifying truth of this case. Especially the CCTV footage shown in court, the scene of Quyen smiling as she left the shop following Yamaguchi, contrasted with the image of her in the cold plastic bag, brought tears to many observers and increased outrage toward the defendant. On February 3, 2023, the trial reached its conclusion with a harsh verdict. The judge declared the court fully accepted the prosecution's arguments. She clearly stated that the defendant's actions constituted robbery with murder and sentenced Yamaguchi Toshiya to life imprisonment, exactly as the prosecutor's office had requested. Yamaguchi bowed his head silently upon hearing the verdict. The life imprisonment sentence meant he would have to spend his remaining days behind bars, only eligible for parole consideration after a minimum of 35 years if he showed good rehabilitation. Below, the victim's family clutched Quyen's portrait and wept, stating that the life sentence had somewhat eased the family's pain. It was reported that initially Yamaguchi intended to appeal to a higher court, but shortly after, he withdrew the appeal and accepted the verdict. The life sentence thus officially took effect in February 2023, closing the legal journey of this shocking case that shook both Vietnam and Japan. A life lost for just 26,000 yen, about $180. That was far too cheap a price for a young life, for unfinished dreams, for a family's happiness, and for the ultimate pain they had to bear. This case is not only the personal tragedy of Le Quyen and her family, but also a painful warning about the potential risks that foreign workers may face abroad. Although Japan is known as one of the safest countries in the world, dark corners still exist, and sometimes just a moment of carelessness, one instance of trusting the wrong person, is enough for everything to collapse. And that's today's case. What are your thoughts about this case? Please share in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to support us and not miss other compelling cases. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.